Hi, lecture number 3, Pathwork Guide Lectures. Number 3, the spirit world. You choose your destiny. Greetings. I bring you God's blessings, my dear ones. Before man incarnates into another earth life, he brings along the tasks he has to fulfill. The plan is outlined. In many cases, the spirit is entitled to discuss the future earth life with the responsible spirit being. Thus, he can fixate to a certain extent, according to the state of development and power of judgment in this matter, how his earth life will be. The spirit to be incarnated has a better view than when housed in a human body. He understands that the meaning of earth life is not to have a life as comfortable as possible, but that the purpose of life is to develop his understanding in order to acquire more rapidly the perfect bliss which cannot be had on earth. And as a spirit, he knows that only through spiritual efforts can the knowledge of the spirit penetrate his intellect. But as a spirit, he also knows that this cannot easily be achieved and that he will encounter difficulties, tests, and that he will have to bear suffering to lead him eventually to the right path and the right attitude. The memory of spirit disappears automatically when matter of the body embraces the spirit. This constitutes the essential factor because the knowledge of spirit has to be obtained. And as said before, it can only be accomplished when man makes the effort to search within himself, not only searching for God and the truths of creation on the outside, but only from within can he recognize the very special meaning and purpose of his own life and the specific tasks he has to fulfill. However, he who is too overwhelmingly impressed by the assets of the world loses the deeper meaning of life and sometimes lives through one incarnation after the other without making progress, and always for the same purpose, having to walk through earth life time and time again. The spirit knows that these are the dangers of earth life, but he also knows that when, from a spiritual viewpoint, if he lives the right human life, he can unfold spiritually in a relatively shorter period of time than it would be possible in the spirit world because of the absence of major frictions there. It's so interesting. The points of friction on earth are mostly material in nature, and everything that is connected with that material, not only because the memory of spirit is extinct and has to be regained, but also due to the many temptations of the material world. And only he who can overcome these difficulties can win and make the best of earth life. Therefore, the spirit to be incarnated knows that it needs these material frictions to awaken the best in him for further progress, and not to cling to matter and its enticements. Before incarnation, a spirit, for example, may ask the higher beings, I beg you, help me, not only with the strength and guidance, but also when I then, as a human being, recognize that I don't meet the quantity expected of me. Give me then this or that trial, which will probably enable me to awaken my inner faculties and to look at life from a different viewpoint, as if all is routine and smooth, all desires fulfilled, if they even agree with that level of development. Thus, my dear ones, it is important for you to recognize that much of your Thus, my dear ones, it is important for you to recognize that much of your repetitious events in life have been chosen and fixated by your spirit before incarnation, when you still had the foresight, before matter encompassed the spirit. And it will be a help for you to know this. Sometimes a spirit assiduously striving for progress chooses a particularly trying destiny, even fervently asking for it, knowing, while free of material density, that this sorrow is little or small and will not last long compared to the gains he will derive from it. And this should be food for thought for all of you. And I suggest that every one of you, my dear friends, think about your life, the trials and tribulations you experience, contemplating whether this or that might not have been chosen before incarnation. Also, in case you find something within you or not yet, which should be fulfilled, contemplate from this viewpoint what you should still find and solve within you. And if you search with utmost intensity, sorry, it's like when I do this. Let me just do that again for a second. So funny, I went too far. It will help for you to know this, and sometimes a spirit assiduously striving for progress chooses a particularly trying destiny, even fervently asking for it, knowing, while free of material density, that the sorrow is but little and will not last long compared to the gains that he will derive from it. And this should be food for thought for all of you. I suggest that every one of you, my dear friends, think about your life, the trials and the tribulations you experienced, contemplating whether this or that might not have been chosen before incarnation. Also, in case you find something within you, or not yet, which should be fulfilled, contemplate from this viewpoint what you should still find and solve within you. Let me reread that again. I'm having a little trouble. Contemplate from this viewpoint what you should still find and solve within you. If you search with utmost intensity, you will receive the answer. You will feel it. Recognitions will come. And this must be learned. It needs exercise and does not come by itself. Don't think that the ability of right meditation comes by itself. It needs exercise, willpower, perseverance, and it requires the battle against your own inner negative currents. But the reward is great and truly blissful. It is worthwhile. When the spirit world observes that a human being is sincere in his endeavors and of best intention to progress, guidance will appear, which also helps on the outside to achieve what he is determined to accomplish. When the earth life is finished, the spirit discards matter. He then realizes that he did not accomplish everything he intended, and it will be handled sometime in such a way that, as a spirit, he is granted the possibility to completely fulfill the past earth life, to finish some tasks or dissolve some burdens. Then he will be able to exert influence on his own earth-living family or surroundings in order to fulfill what he had intended to. And only such influence is much more difficult, although easier for him as a spirit being, because his clear sight is restored. The lost memory is regained, and he understands what it is all about. The difficulty lies in his lack of penetrability and influence upon the human being. For example, one man can influence another one, and especially by self-discipline. An indirect influence is always more effective and lasts longer. Thus, setting an example is far more convincing than words, persuasions, or forcing one's will upon the other one, even though it might be right or serve for the best. At the ratio of his ability to overpower weakness, to prove true within himself the spiritual laws and acquire more love, man will break through to another human being where it is needed. Oh, that's so powerful. There is a never failing consequence of law abidance. It is an indirect effect, but the success will show openly with certainty always and for everybody. But a spirit cannot do this because most human beings do not hear the inspiring words of spirit. Wow, that is so heavy. Let me read that again. But a spirit cannot do this because most human beings do not hear the inspiring words of spirit. And if they perceive them, they are frequently misinterpreted or shaken off. And it is very, very difficult for the spirit, and he needs much more time if he will at all be able to finish a task as a spirit which he started as a human being. he may need another earth life for that purpose. And thus, a human being and a spirit builds exactly the world in which he lives. He builds a home in the spirit world congruent to the earth life. And he also builds his future earth life. In all deeds, thoughts, and feelings are forms of which then the spirit home consists, although not permanently, and from which in turn the fated events in the future earth life will be deduced. And it is not only in congruity with that which is consequently derived from his own attitudes and opinions, but it also includes the resulting effects. And thus, these form structures represent exactly what the one concerned needs for his future development. Meditate over this sentence. I'll read it again because it says, the Spirit saying, meditate over the sentence. Thus, these form structures represent exactly what the one concerned needs for his future development. Much is conveyed in it. It is again an example how the equation must be equalized, how tribulations are self-induced, but serve as a healing agent. In this you can fathom the vast greatness of God's wisdom and the magnificence of his laws. If you understand this, you will realize that destiny and free will are not two factors excluding each other, but they're interwoven and interconnected. And you will also recognize that the fated events in your life are already spirit forms which manifest then in a concrete way. So if by the lack of knowledge or lack of awareness of these divine laws, unfavorable forms are built, each being has to dissolve these unfavorable forms, and this can only be done by walking the spiritual path of self-discipline and self-recognition and search within. For all this, my dear ones, you need willpower. Now, many of my friends will say, this is good and well, but one is born with a strong willpower, the other one none. How should those who lack willpower tackle this? I will discuss this now. This willpower, as any other attribute, must be produced and built by yourself. And it can only be done in this way. So if a human being is born with the willpower, he has produced it somehow in the past, and so that he brings along this treasure, if I may say so, now as a helping factor. If it has not been built in the past, then it should be acquired in his present life. The same holds true for all other assets, be it love capacity, tolerance, kindliness, or whatever else. And I want to show you now how each one of you can produce willpower, because God does not request the impossible from anyone, my cherished ones. Willpower is a direct result of recognition of the knowing and the corresponding decision. Every human being possesses a certain amount of strength, and it depends on his emphasis into which channel he directs his strength, using it for unnecessary efforts which lead to nothing that is spiritually valuable, or wasting it on sick, impure emotional currents to which they give over entirely, which requires much strength. Now it is a spiritual law that Now it is a spiritual law that strength-consumed will be replenished when it is used for spiritually constructive purposes. Let me read that again because that's interesting. Now it is a spiritual law that strength consumed will be replenished when it is used for spiritually constructive purposes. However, if your strength currents circle in negative rotation or in spiritually non-productive currents, they are wearing you down and are a waste, because strength is not sufficiently renewable when used negatively and non-productively. And you will also notice that human beings who do a lot of good seem to have superhuman strength. Thus, if he knows what life's main objective is, he will channel the strength he has and will throw the switch within him accordingly. And if a human being just drifts along, the strength currents will almost automatically be forced into the wrong direction and be used without being sufficiently renewed. And thus, the first step to produce willpower is contemplation, or as you also say, right meditation. If you have attained certain recognition, it will be easier to draw the necessary inner consequences and to make the decisions resulting therefrom. And it is also a decision and an inner revolution if man tells himself, well, I live on this earth for a certain reason. I lack the willpower to fulfill the purpose of my existence to the best of my ability and with all the discipline that is required. But I will now ask God to give me the necessary strength because I actually want to do right. I truly love God and I want to please Him. And I also will take the time and make some effort to think about it and to open myself up for the recognition of God's wisdom. And I will devote daily and regularly and say 20 to 30 minutes to contemplate my spiritual life. And while I feel that I still lack the willpower, I will make this subject a part of my meditation, of my conversation with God and with Christ, who is ready to help me, and with my personal spirit friends, who are always waiting to help me when I meet the conditions and am willing to take advice and gain recognition. Thereby, I am then planting the seed to acquire the willpower that I am still lacking. This everybody is able to do. Every one of you has that much willpower and that much discipline power. You human beings do not need to start with the most difficult. You don't start with the roof when you build a house, but with the foundation. And actually, what is required at first is only a rechanneling of the strength currents and the thought momentum, if I may say so. And if man makes and keeps a decision, which is not too difficult or too much for anybody, then the spirit forces will help, that the willpower is fortified, so that further and more effective steps in the development process seem to be much easier. And this I am able to promise you, my friends, and many have received the confirmation that it is so. And then even those who lack the willpower in the beginning will, after a while, have just as much of it as those human beings who were born with it. So if you recognize what is at stake upon which area to concentrate most, and if you need as a kneading bread, this knowledge from the superficial level of the mind into the deepest levels, which is done by regular and right meditation, which to learn, of course, is part of the path, then you will also make the necessary inner decisions. I have discussed these inner decisions in my recent lecture. So this too is a decision which has to be made once, and it can only be arrived at by way of recognition. Summarizing, I will say that in order to obtain willpower, it must be derived from recognition. It requires a corresponding decision. If you feel you don't have enough willpower, the basic recognition is missing as to what it is at stake. You may understand it vaguely, but your soul is not yet fully absorbed in it. Maybe there is some resistance within you, tempting you to cling to the way of lassitude and non-discipline. And this human being is then in an inner discrepancy. One part within him has the spiritual knowledge, but the other part of his personality does not draw the necessary consequences of what he knows somehow, and of what he even does not want to be aware of. Thus, the first step is to deepen this knowledge, get away from superficiality. And on that, you have to work. You have to work first so that recognition penetrates the whole personality. And only when you work on this, and you can do it, then with just a bit of effort and time, you will quite certainly make the decision and will to direct your life and your inner forces towards the spiritual, realizing and fully aware that only then can the earthly material problems be solved, and only then. In this way, man produces within himself the greatest power by which all further evolutionary steps can be accomplished much easier. Anyhow, as always, the first step is the most difficult one. Oh, how often do we observe that a human being, thinking he has no willpower, would have far more than sufficient strength if he would only channel it into the right path, if he would only throw the switch. But only the recognition of such necessity will enable him to act accordingly. And as long as he thinks he can do it without, he will not act differently, and he will stay on the path of laissez-faire. But this attitude is a sign that such man's relationship to God is by no means harmonious. And therefore, if man finds himself in such a situation, he should start to think about God and the Christ instead of shying away from such contemplation. Everybody will have to tell himself whatever else he may or may not believe, except for an atheist, that he owes God that much attention. It must be the will of God. And you should also give thanks to Christ for what he, by the love and power, has done for you, what he has taken upon himself. If you meditate and contemplate in this direction, you will come to the right conclusion and decision so that your life will become a lived religion, not only theory. Don't you think this is not asking much? Just a little bit of time and effort daily. Search within yourself what is lacking to build your spiritual life correctly. And if you really feel the lack of willpower and it is not easy to discipline yourself, then this should be the first subject of your daily meditation hour. How to lay the foundation upon which to build your spiritual dome. You should ask for help, strength, and recognition, but also search within for what prevents you from keeping such a daily meditation period. And be honest with yourself and push aside all cover-ups and subterfuge. Are you afraid to discover something within you? Are you afraid to discover something within which you would like to remain buried? Well, if this is the case, just think in terms of simple, healthy logic. Nothing hidden before God and the world of spirit. Not to yourself when you not to yourself when you return to that world. So the sooner it pops up, the better for you. On the other hand, you may also say that which is hidden creates more trouble to man than when it is brought to the surface consciously, recognized, and digested. Your psychologists know much of this so that you are also aware that you don't gain anything if you close your eyes, refusing to see what is in each of us, what is in you. And you should cultivate this general idea in order to take root in you. It will be a blessing. After the initial difficulties are overcome and you have gained a little power over self, at least in this respect, the world of spirit will show you the next step on your path, what to be exploited and battled next. Life will present itself, and when you have learned right meditation, you will be able to judge with open eyes these daily events and recognize the signs. And even those friends who have overcome the initial difficulties do not always handle the hour of meditation quite well. And it is often kept too much as a mechanical procedure, always the same, not only as far as prayers for others, but also for themselves concerned. Your meditation and prayers must vary because you should feel the specific requirement of the moment. And if you sometimes are not aware of it, recognition will be given when you really search and direct your full attention to what should be realized, learned, and overcome and accepted. And pray to God and the Christ to help you in this specific problem. Discuss it with your personal spirit friends who are so close and who are assigned to help you in your work. And then your prayers live. When you have prayed for help in your recognition and for strength concerning the outstanding problems of the moment, then be still. Listen, think, feel in which direction your thoughts are led. Then you will slowly become aware of the interconnections, their origin, and why you react as you do. And this growing understanding of your inner reactions and currents will push you into progress. Increase your courage to face your inner truths without fear. Make firm resolutions. Contemplate these truths about yourself with care by independently reaching more depth of thought. Thus, your spiritual life will become more productive because it is animated, continuously changing, and not sinking to a fixed formula that is repeated daily. And in this way, your relationship to God will grow into a harmonious one. And that's lecture number 3.